Yeah. Oh, yeah. Beast Deluxe. Yeah.
Everybody knows that the dice are loaded. Everybody rolls with their fingers crossed. Everybody knows the war is over. Everybody knows the good guys lost. Everybody knows the fight was fixed. The poor stay poor, the rich get rich. That's how it goes. Everybody knows. Everybody knows that the boat is leaking. Everybody knows that the captain lied. Everybody got this broken feeling, like their father or their dog just died. Everybody talking to their pockets. Everybody wants a box of chocolates and a long stem rose. Everybody knows. Everybody knows that you love me, baby. Everybody knows that you really do. Everybody knows that you've been faithful. Oh, give or take a night or two. Everybody knows you've been discreet, but there were so many people you just had to meet without your clothes. Everybody knows. Everybody knows. Everybody knows. That's how it goes. Everybody knows. Everybody knows. Everybody knows. That's how it goes. Everybody knows. And everybody knows that it's now or never. Everybody knows that it's me or you. And everybody knows that you live forever when you've done a line or two. Everybody knows the deal is rotten. Old Black Joe still picking cotton for your ribbons and bows. And everybody knows. And everybody knows that the plague is coming. Everybody knows that it's moving fast. Everybody knows that the naked man and woman are just a shining artifact of the past. Everybody knows the scene is dead, but there's gonna be a meter on your bed that will disclose what everybody knows. And everybody knows that you're in trouble. Everybody knows what you've been through, from the bloody cross on top of Calvary to the beach of Malibu. Everybody knows it's coming apart. Take one last look at the Sacred Heart before it blows. Everybody knows.
I wanted to share some things real quick that help better answer the question of who they are and why they lie. It's not something that will answer the questions in their entirety. I'm not going to have time to talk about every single little group and organization, but there are some main players in this game, and they have an end game in mind. Prophecies are going to be fulfilled. There are battles ahead, and we need to be ready for them. And so understanding who has lied to us and what they have changed will guide you in a better direction so that you can pray the right way, understand who the Father is, what creation really is like, what we live on, those sort of things. And so the journey is about to get weird. We're going to look at a lot of different things, and it's hard to know where to start. This is such a deep topic, and I don't want to waste time. This is to open your eyes to how serious this battle really is and who we're up against. And I want to start by looking back at some things we've already seen in another video that we've talked about with Rome, and how much the stuff we have seen looks like predictive programming. That's what we call it. Almost like these people were psychic that did these paintings, and that's not what's going on at all. They take what has already happened, and they like to repeat history and put in our face the sacking of Rome, the imagery we've seen with that and that was already in existence, and they like to replicate it with their own little, what you call crisis actors. These are people, agents in place, whatever you want to call them, carrying out a mission, the divide and conquer mission as their goal. And that's why they look like this. That's why they do these things. It's not random. It's not like, oh, this guy just woke up and he wanted to wear some horns and some fur and have his shirt off. They do these things because it's in our face, lies all the time. And you can get overwhelmed with it. I've seen people get overwhelmed with all these lies. I just want to expose them so that you can see how interconnected we are to ancient history, to ancient Rome, to Babylon, all of these things that a lot of the truthers have been looking into. And for those of you who didn't see that video where we broke all this down, the history of Washington, D.C. is very interconnected to Rome. And it shows that we live in significant times, that even the Pope that we have now is significant in their end game. And if you look back at the property records, of course, Rome was the original name of the place that the Capitol sits on. It was called Rome, Maryland, according to the property records. And the owner was a man named Francis Pope. And the nickname the Catholic Church gave him back then was Pope of Rome on the Tiber. And the reason that's kind of coincidental is because, of course, Pope Francis, not Francis Pope, is literally in Rome, and the Tiber River is in Rome. And so their little joke back then being played out is not a random circumstance or chance. And the fact that the oldest church in D.C. is a Jesuit church called the Holy Trinity is also not random. It is a big part of what is going on now with our given false reality. Okay, so to talk about these connections, it's quite the mind-blowing stuff. It goes deep, and I'm going to be going really fast through all of this, so bear with us. But you have, of course, here Pope Francis, and his name is not Pope Francis. That is his new title, his new name that he has acquired. And I like to thank Tony from Canada. If you're watching, this guy, I talked to him for like an hour and a half, and my brain almost exploded. He was just filling me with all these cool little facts and information, and he was telling me that the Pope's last name, Bergoglio, has the word Gog right in the middle of his name. And the reason that is probably significant, I'm not saying that it is, it could just be another coincidence, but when you look back at Revelation, and the names Gog and Magog are applied to the evil forces that will join with Satan in the great struggle at the end of time. And after Satan has been bound and chained for 1,000 years, he will be released and will rise up against God. He will go forth and deceive the nations of the world, Gog and Magog, gathering them together in great numbers to attack the saints and Jerusalem, the city God loves. God will send fire from heaven to destroy them, and will then preside over the last judgment. So we have this Gog and Magog scenario, and of course, this guy here with the last name Bergoglio, could be coincidental, but he is the first ever Jesuit Pope. Why is that important, and why is that interesting? Well, let's look at the Jesuit oath. And this is kind of nerve-wracking to look at on here based on how graphic it is, and I don't know what YouTube will allow with this, so I will try to censor myself as much as I can. But it starts out by talking about who they are in the presence of. In the presence of the Almighty God, the blessed Virgin Mary, the blessed Michael the Archangel, the blessed St. John, and so on. And then their founder, St. Ignatius Loyola, this guy here, you look him up, quite interesting. He was their founder. And guess who he got his approval from to found the Jesuits? Pope Paul III. What's significant about this guy and the deceptions of the world that we live on? He was in cahoots with Nicholas Copernicus. He was also into astrology. Nicholas Copernicus dedicated his heliocentric treatise to Pope Paul III. And this is the guy who approved the Jesuit order. and you see the sun symbology there. Again, it's not random. There's a reason they have the 32 rays on their sun logo. This guy's story is in itself really weird. He was one of the first ones to, actually I think he was the first one, they said, to ever have the stigmata. If you haven't looked into that, creepy stuff, not biblical whatsoever, where people start bearing the wounds allegedly of the crucifixion, and he was the first one to do that. It just sounds so demonic. It's always given me the creeps. Even when I was a kid and I heard about that, it gave me the creeps. And the Father, his goal is to set us free. He's not going to sit there and just wound us over and over for the rest of our lives. And but anyways, this is who the founder was of this movement, and he got his approval, Pope Paul III, interconnected with Nicholas Copernicus around that same time. Okay, and so I'm not going to read this, because when I read it, it's almost like I'm taking the oath, because they all have to read and take this oath. I don't recommend reading this thing out loud. And so when we start looking into what they will do to the heretics, to the people like us who believe differently, they say, I will hang, burn, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive those infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs and wombs of the women, and crush their infants' heads against the walls. Oh my God, it's so hard to read. In order to annihilate an execrable race, that when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly, like they're doing now, use poisonous cup, the strangulation cords, the steels of the poniard, or the leaden bullets, regardless of the honor, rank, dignity, or authority of the persons, whatever may be their condition in life, either public or private, as I at any time may be directed by any agent of the Pope. This is what Jesuits say. Our Pope is a Jesuit. Or the superior of the Holy Father of the Society of Jesus. And they're not talking about our Holy Father. In confirmation of which I hereby dedicate my life, their life, which your life is your soul, and their corporal powers, and with their dagger, and they have a dagger placed against their heart. That probably sounds familiar. If you're familiar with other secret societies' oaths, cut and paste right there. That's what they do. They are devout unto death. These deceivers, they have missions. That's why one of them invented the Big Bang, to deceive. They work really well together, while we are divided and angry because of their lies. But these people, even Pope Francis here, he took his name from St. Francis of Assisi, or Assisi, I don't know how you say that. And this guy, I looked into him, I thought, this guy, surely he's a good guy. You know, that's who he got his name after. Here he is with the sun behind his head. Surely he's not some sun god worshiper. But here is a quote from one of his famous songs, St. Francis, where he talks about, be praised, my Lord, through all your creatures, especially through my Lord, brother, son. He is referring to the Son as his Lord and his brother. And I've seen a lot of people say, oh, Jesus is the Son, S-U-N. To them, they are sun God worshiping. And it's about to get really exposed here in just a second. When you look at some of the things they do, you have the whole service here where they show their solar monstrance. Why is it important that it's called a solar monstrance? Well, look at the word solar. What does that mean? Well, the S-O-L is short for Sol Invictus. And A-R, the prefix on that word, means belonging to. It belongs to their sun god, Sol Invictus. That's who it belongs to. Kind of like our heliocentric model. Helios is short for their sun god Helios, and centric just means centered around. So they use those words, and they have those solar monstrances. And a lot of people got really offended when I showed this imagery in another video. And I really, when I showed it in that video, had no clue how deep it went into the sun god worshiping realm. And I'm going to read a quote here from some Catholic website that I picked up that says, because Catholics believe that Christ is truly and substantially present in the Eucharist, the reserved sacrament serves as a focal point of devotion. During Eucharist adoration, the sacrament is displayed in the monstrance, typically on the altar. When not being displayed, the reserved sacrament is locked in the tabernacle. And here we have it. They say we do not need to have lived 2,000 years ago to see Jesus. To have him in our presence, we only need to gaze upon this graven image, consecrated host, inside the luna. They have a moon, a crescent moon, that was typical with the worshiping of Baal. That is not good, and that's where they are putting the Messiah, they say. That's where he exists to them, within the monstrance, to see him, to be with him, to adore him, while they're looking at that sun with all those rays. Having such a beautiful method of displaying our Lord helps us to focus on him who loves us. And so they say, they then go on to say, do we not have in the Eucharist the living, true, and real Jesus present before us? Why look for more? You can just look right here, people. You don't have to look to the Word. You don't have to look to what the Father says about him or what they say in the commandments about graven images. No, ignore all that. Okay, I know this is probably offending some people who have taken part of these. I'm not here to set and skate around some of these topics due to offending people, pray about this. If I'm wrong, I want to be proven wrong, and I want the Holy Spirit to prove it to you that I am, if I am, about this stuff. There is a lot deeper meanings behind the things that are commonplace, mainstream Christianity than you could ever imagine. And in terms of deceptions that many people are kind of okay with now, it's like Sunday worship and the Sabbath and all of that. Most people understand that Sunday is the new Sabbath that came about, and it came about well after the resurrection, and it was actually a law. And the saints back then, St. Jerome, one of them, who was a Jesuit, said, if pagans call it the day of the sun, we willingly agree, for today the light of the world is raised, today is revealed the Son of Justice with healing in his rays. And so there's more symbology with their logo. And seeing these things is one thing, but understanding why they would continue to do that, why the evil ones would deceive these people into thinking this is what the Father wants, goes back to what the Word tells us in Ezekiel. I've mentioned this before, but it's important to see it for those of you who have never seen this. What makes the Father angry? Is sun god worshiping mentioned in the Bible? Yes. And when the Father is showing this to Ezekiel, he is telling him all of these different things that make him angry. And he says, after showing him some things that really made him angry, some abominations, he says to Ezekiel, hast thou seen this, O son of man? Turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations than these. And so after he tells him that, he turns, and it says, and he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house. And behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs toward the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east, and they worshipped the sun toward the east. He is telling us, this is not ancient history. This is stuff that was very recent, before Christ. They were worshiping the sun back then. It did not stop. And that's why we can look at the symbology throughout time, 400 years before Christ. We see their sun god. 280 years, we see the Colossus of Rhodes, which is the Greek version of Helios. 100 years before Christ. 100 years after Christ, you have Alexander the Great, sometime in that time frame, trying to deify himself as one of the sun gods. And then you have the Roman sun god that our solar system is named after. Sol Invictus. Looks a lot like the Statue of Liberty. Probably a drag queen. Who knows? Here it is again. You have the 1400s version. So around the time Columbus sailed the ocean blue, they were doing this stuff. They were doing their ceremonies. And then you have, of course, Satan summoning his legions, a famous painting from 1795 that just happens to look nearly identical to the Statue of Liberty that is the new Colossus, named after the original Colossus, the Greek sun god Helios, right in front of our faces here. And this connection continues to grow. These people, I believe it's interchangeable. This figure here, Lucifer, the light bearer, Helios, a lot of the stuff you see now, like these guys, little comic relief. Somebody brought that up that, man, those statues look a lot like the Island Boys. And pray for those guys. I heard one of them talking. It was sad. He said he sold his soul, and ever since he's been miserable. Why is it? Because this world cannot offer us what the Father can. Your soul, your spirit, you know that. Once these people sell out, they become extremely depressed and miserable. It's not worth it. To gain the world and to lose what the Father can give you, eternal life, is the worst decision you could possibly ever make. And so the connections keep growing from there until you get, of course, to modern times, where we have things like the Apollo missions, the deceivers really solidifying their model of creation with this. And guess what? This is a sun god. Apollo was a sun god, and he's the twin brother of Artemis, and Artemis is the new moon mission. There's no coincidence that they would put the face of the false god that they named their mission after right there in this yellow moon. I don't think I've ever seen the moon that color. The moon changes all sorts of different colors. It is a perfect little clock above us in a calendar, and we can predict what color it's going to be, allegedly based on how the atmosphere is going to be affecting it on a given day, when that is bogus. This thing is a perfect timepiece for signs and appointed times, and that's why we can tell, 100 years from now when there's going to be a blue moon or a blood moon. We know these things because it's mathematical. It has nothing to do with the weather and the atmosphere around the world. It may have somewhat to do with it, but it is mathematical and easy to predict if you can just follow the patterns. And they understand dates and how they work quite well. And so it's not coincidental that they would name their missions after these sun gods, and that we would continue to see them showing up in all of the coins where people like Constantine, someone that people think was just so noble, and he helped make Christianity what it is today. This guy was very evil in his intentions in merging Christianity with paganism and a lot of the things we have now. That's why you see him on a coin with the sun god here. And he had a alleged vision where the sun god Apollo guaranteed him a 30-year reign. And so he wanted to put himself on a coin with the sun god. And of course he's in front of the sun god here because he wants to be somewhat immortal here And that is where you get the current situation where most people, including myself, grew up following the patterns that were set about the Sunday worship. Most of you know that, of course, Sunday is not Sabbath, it is the new Sabbath. And the ruling of that didn't just say, oh, well, hey, you can observe Sabbath on that day if you want. It became a law. You were not allowed to rest and Judaize on the traditional Sabbath. And so those things a lot of you were kind of on board with and understand why it happened, who was behind it, and these powers that shouldn't be are working together and keeping these secrets. And they aren't keeping secrets because they are planning some surprise party for you guys. That'd be nice to be like, hey, it's 2022, guys. We've been holding this secret for a long time. We're going to take care of you. No, that's not going to happen. They do these things. They have these oaths that are extreme. That sounds extreme to some of you. I don't think many of you would make that type of oath to where if you break the secrecy, you're going to have some of the things done to you that it says there. This is a devout group of individuals. We aren't wrestling with just individual flesh and blood people. They are being influenced by powers of darkness, the same ones that have deceived the world time and time again. And you can look throughout biblical history where there are times that maybe only one family or one person was really awake. We kind of feel alone when we know that we're all spread out, it seems like, and they're trying to persecute the elect and say that it's for medical reasons and safety. And I know many of you are affected by what's going on now. And so it's time to really ramp up in our spiritual warfare and really spend time with the one who loves us, the one they're trying to keep us from, the one they are altering his appointed times, trying to get you in the Christmas spirit, the team spirit, the shopping spirit, you name it. They want to get you in every spirit except for the Holy Spirit. And it's time to make that change and not get caught up in those pagan practices and figure out what those pagan practices are and do away with those worldly ways. It's not easy. You know, you'll get some heat from the family who's like, what's wrong? This is about Jesus. We need to do that. And you're like, no, actually it's not. This is not about him at all. The Bible tells us not to do certain things. And so look into this stuff. It's not something that I'm just making up here. There are some deeper connections. I will get into that as far as what else they're lying about. Again, the shape of the world, that's one big one, but they didn't just change the Sabbath. They didn't just stop there. There was a message being preached that they could not stand. The enemy could not stand. They thought that killing the Messiah would do away with a lot of their problems, and it really amplified it, made it worse because that empty tomb did not lie, and there's a lot that had to happen. They were desperate, and so they changed his image, and it goes beyond just putting up these little fancy sun god looking things and saying, that's where he is, look here. You know, it goes beyond that, and I wanted to show you some of the interconnectedness of these deceivers and how devout they are when you look at their oaths and what they are carrying out right now. And so finding out who they are, a lot of people think that it's all about these different secret societies and people keeping this wisdom, and that's partly true, but that wisdom and that knowledge comes from somewhere, in this battle that we're in, like the word told us, and we've seen this verse many times, that it's not against flesh and blood. So we're going to be looking at the spiritual aspect of this warfare because that's where it originated. We're going to go all the way back to creation and then start moving forward from there. So it's going to be some deeper subjects in terms of the spiritual realm. But the word, I'm going to read this verse real quick. It tells us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. Most of us heard this verse growing up and how to protect yourself by putting on the whole armor of the Father. However, we didn't know how serious this spiritual warfare was because, for the most part, I know I'm speaking for myself here, I had no clue what these powers of darkness were, where they got their wisdom, what their plans were, and how much they had deceived the world. And waking up to the truth about creation and how well the powers of darkness have hid it from the entire world really opens your eyes to the fact that they are desperate and they are actually quite wise. And so, where do these powers of darkness come from? We have to analyze that because there is no way mankind could do the things they're doing on their own. We don't live long enough to figure that much out. The people who are doing this are working directly, hand in hand, with the influences of these powers of darkness. That's why the oaths that we looked at in part one were so serious. These things show you that they are binding themselves. You even see the word binding right here to these penalties if they are to break their secrecy and become one of us. It's a serious offense. And so they bind themselves, they swear these oaths, and you can go back and watch it if you forgot what those were, because I'm not going to read those graphic words, the things that they agree, especially in the Jesuit oath, to do to the heretics. It is so sad, the things that they speak out loud when they are becoming one of these members. And so they have to be devout, but that wording, like I said, relates to the wisdom of the fallen, because when you go back to the book of Enoch and you learn what the fallen were doing, the very first thing they did was they swore an oath. and they use the exact same terminology, binding ourselves right there. And so every time you sign a contract, you'll hear them say, "This is a binding contract." This is something that we borrowed from the wisdom of the fallen, these binding oaths and contracts, where they are binding themselves to a mission and agreeing to suffer the consequences together. If one of them goes down, they all do. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this oath that I'm looking at here, this is from the book of Enoch. I highly suggest you read it. It's extremely fascinating, the things you hear, and it fills in a lot of the missing pieces that answers the questions as to how the world became so corrupt before and after the flood. And we're going to be looking at both of those aspects, before and after. This is before the flood and before the world became as corrupt as it was and needed to be cleansed. And so the watchers came down to Mount Hermon, and this is their pact, or their oath. It says, "Let us all swear an oath and all bind ourselves," just like the Masonic oath, "by mutual imprecations," or that word just means spoken curse, "not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing." And so they all swore, it tells us, and they bound themselves together by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200 who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And so that was what they were doing, binding themselves for a purpose. And it doesn't tell you what that purpose was. It just says that they planned to do this thing. And so what was this thing they were mentioning here in the oath? Well, all you have to do is look back at what happened after they made this oath, and they began corrupting all flesh and doing this in many different ways. They taught us all sorts of things, like how to make weapons of war. And now that you have these weapons of war, what is the egos of men going to do? Go out, conquer, murder, kill, do all the things that are against the Father's commands: godlessness, fornication, enchantments, root cutting, astrology, lawlessness, things that are returning now, things that are really big in the world and promoted, like the smiting of infants in the womb. We call it abortion now. It's not a new trick, it's something the enemy's been using for a long time. And so, revealing eternal secrets, which they thought they had all of the deep ones, but they didn't. There were things they did not know, and the Father kept from them for a reason, so that the events you see later on with the Messiah could happen. But they revealed eternal secrets to mankind. And it says here, which men were striving to learn. They wanted to know these things. When you look at the New Age religions and things going on now, people are wanting to learn that. They see it as this great wisdom, and it is wisdom, but it's the wisdom of the fallen, and it's meant to cause you to perish. It is not good for you to be lured in by that. But just like in the garden, that cunning serpent knew how to get Eve to break what the Father had commanded them. And what was it about the lie the snake told that made them want to eat of this fruit? Well, it was that same wisdom luring them in. You're going to be wise if you do this. And the serpent even said, "Because God knows that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." So this was that lure, pulling you in. Oh, you're going to be so wise. You're going to know good and evil. Right now, you just know good. And so that tempting was there. She gave in, and then Adam gave in. And in that day, he died. And I remember reading that and thinking, you know, Adam didn't die the next day. He woke up, and he moved on. He had kids. All these things happened. He didn't die that day. So why did the Father tell him he would if he ate of this fruit? Well, Jubilees, just to give some of you an answer that have had that same question, in chapter 4, answers this really well. It says, "And he lacked 70 years of 1,000 years." This is when he died. So when he died, he lacked 70 years of 1,000 years. For 1,000 years are as one day in the testimony of the heavens. And therefore was it written concerning the tree of knowledge, "On the day that ye eat thereof, ye shall die." For this reason he did not complete the years of this day, for he died during it. To me, that makes a lot of sense. So he did not complete that day. And if you look at the timeline we're on now, with 1,000 years being a day, or a day 1,000 years, it's interesting because we're approaching the seventh day, which is significant if you've read the creation story. So, a really cool way to look at it there. But that was sort of the first downfall of man. But the wisdom of the fallen we're talking about comes from those watchers, and they corrupted the entire world. Like we said earlier, we needed a flood. And I say the entire world, there was Noah and his family. Those were the only ones that made it out. And so, how did that wisdom of the fallen return? You have a flood, clean start, everything should be good, right? I would think so. However, there are several ways the wisdom of the fallen returned, and one of those has to do with what they produced when they were here. Because when they were in the world and they were disclosing these things, they taught them to their sons. Who were their sons? That's a big deal. So we're going to take another look back in the book of Enoch at what it tells us they did around the time they were making the pact that we looked at. It says, "And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them," talking about women, "and said to one another, Come, let us choose wise from among the children of men, and beget us children. And all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go in unto them, and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments and cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. and they became pregnant, and they bare great giants. And so that right there is referencing their sons. This becomes what would later be called their beloved, but it says their sons, as a punishment for what they did when they corrupted the world, would have to slay each other. And so it says here, and when their sons have slain one another, and they have seen the destruction of their beloved ones, talking about their sons, their beloved sons, bind them fast for 70 generations. So the fallen were to be bound up, and it says, in the valleys of the earth till the day of their judgment, and of their consummation till the judgment that is forever and ever is consummated. So they were bound up. That's why I was asking the question, how did the wisdom return? Well, they taught their wisdom to their sons. What happened to their sons? I thought they just killed themselves and destroyed each other. Sort of a Rob Skiba called it a clash of the titans, and it's what a lot of Greek mythology is most likely based on, the clash of these titans here. So these giants who were produced from the spirits and flesh, it says, shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. Evil spirits have proceeded from their bodies because they are born from men and from the holy watchers is their beginning and primal origin. They shall be evil spirits on the earth. So when you hear about these evil spirits tormenting mankind, that's their origin. They are angry. Their punishment was to slay each other in this battle while their parents watched them. And so they went from being these massive, destructive creatures to now destroying each other. And then their spirits lived on. And when it tells us what these evil spirits actually do now, it says, and the spirits of the giants afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth, and cause trouble. They take no food, but nevertheless hunger and thirst, and cause offenses. And these spirits shall rise up against the children of men and against the women, because they have proceeded from them. They are against our Creator. They are against us. They know that the relationship with Him, what that does for us, and they are against Him. And so, after seeing the goals of these evil spirits, it makes sense, given that they were teaching these secret things by the Watchers, that they would continue on that legacy. That's why right now we're seeing the corrupting of all flesh 2.0, because that same wisdom is being shared. You can see it with creation. When you compare the two, the wisdom of the fallen is still there, and it is a lie. It's the wisdom that eliminates the Father and the Son. And we were warned about that when we look back at 1 John. It tells us exactly the goals of these spirits of the Antichrist. There was many of them back then, it says, and they essentially deny the Father and the Son. So that's their goal. We know where they get their wisdom. And so the best way in the modern world to deny the Father and the Son is to replace them with a big bang, some sort of random accident, eliminating the Father's creation model, trying to eliminate him. And you think, this globe could be this really miraculous model. I mean, it's a pressurized ball in a vacuum. Yeah, that's pretty cool. But the story they give behind that, the words that they use to name that model, the numbers that they have buried deep within it, all of these paint a different picture, because the word, according to the wisdom of the Father, our world is created. It's immovable. It has a firmament that's mentioned as the only structure that took an entire day to create. And it's the second day of creation. It's a big deal. And so, all of this wisdom and the contrasting wisdom is why these unclean spirits would use people who are devout, taking oaths, just like the Watchers did. They learned from them. They saw that. They have copied that. And so, that is why all of the things you see with these secret societies is the way it is. It's a secret, and it's not for your good. I just happened to stop by the Georgia Guidestones the other day. It was on my way home, and my wife saw a sign and said, "Hey, it's only 8 miles away. Let's stop by there and look at them." These things, as you can see, it looks like they do blood sacrifices here. They tell you the plan that they have in plain sight. That's why everybody freaks out and goes there. But up until recently, no one knew who made these things, who set them up like that, who funded it. Well, it was secret societies. Two of those secret societies are known. One of them happens to be the Masons, the other was the Rosicrucians, and they all share a same goal, according to these stones, because they are wanting us to maintain this population of under 500 million, which would involve them doing a lot of destruction to get there, and that's why people freak out when they see these things. But they are set in place where they are based on the sun's location, because it ties in to sun god worship. Whoever put these up knows that the world is stationary. That's why there's a hole drilled into this thing where you can see the pole star, Polaris, the North Star, year round. If you look through this hole, it's a massive stone with a little tunnel bored through it, and you can see that star all year round. And the sun, which is part of that perfect clock set in place at creation in the firmament, is going around and showing us noon every day of the year based on how they set this thing up. It's really crafty how they did it, but they are, again, are using the wisdom of the fallen to plan these things, to do these things. And like my dad says, they might be able to set these stones up, but our Father has the last say. He wins in the end. He gathers us up, and his Son will return yet again. And so before that happens, there's a lot of things that are going to go down. The spiritual warfare is going to increase. I'm hearing from a lot of truth seekers that it is just ramping up in their lives. They're getting discouraged. They are under full blown attack. We've experienced some of the same things here. That's why it's taken us so long to get part two out. But the persecution is not that bad yet where we are. I know it's going to get worse. Just take joy in that. It's hard to say that, but the warfare is real, and these powers of darkness we were told about are doing the things that we were warned about, and that is why we see the things we see when we look at those who rule over us. They put those symbols everywhere. And like the book of Jubilees told us in the very beginning, that they will make to themselves high places and groves and graven images, and they will worship each his own graven images so as to go astray, and they will sacrifice their children to demons and to all the works of the error of their hearts. And so they have done exactly that. They even call the place where all the world powers go Bohemian Groves. It is a grove. They're graven images. They even put those graven images in the layout of their domains where they rule over the rest of us and create these phony titles and powers and authorities that everybody submits to. But they do things the way they do for spiritual reasons. That's why there's a broken pentagram right there in the middle of DC. I hate even having this stuff up on the screen because it is demonic. It's of these unclean spirits. That's why they do what they do. That's who they are getting their wisdom from. And that's why when you see the world powers agreeing on something peacefully, it's always something that keeps us in their lies and our minds separated from the truth. And the first two that were a red flag to me when looking into this were keeping Antarctica safe from private exploration. Nothing to see there. They're just studying ice for decades peacefully, but they signed a treaty. And it's one of those things that all world powers did peacefully, and it's been that way throughout the Cold War and every conflict since. But the second thing that they do peacefully occurred at around the same time. They tried to pretend there was some sort of race, and then it was like, okay, now we all get along now that America's gone to the moon. And they still just smiling, happy faces. And that's all you see, no matter how long you keep them locked in a tin can. They're just the happiest people out there. And those two things were the two main things until recent times that the world powers worked together with. And now, of course, we have Revelation 18:23, where they are deceiving the world with pharmakia, and they're doing so intensely. If they weren't so intense with it, it wouldn't be such a red flag to everyone. But they are all unified, putting out the same messages, telling the same lies over and over again. And we're not even allowed to question it here. That's why we don't talk about it very much anymore. But the powers that shouldn't be are unified in three things, and they aren't doing so based on their own will. It is the will of those unclean spirits, and prophecies must be fulfilled. We know who wins in the end. Trying to corrupt all flesh is not going to work out for them. It's not going to save them. And for those of you who are waking up to this, be thankful that we have a way out. The Father is calling us out of Babylon and out of Egypt yet again, and it's time to turn to Him and use that example He gave us with His Son to do His will. And when you're in those situations where you're about to endure persecution and you don't want to, but it's inevitable, just say those same words that we were taught by the Messiah when He lived out the example He gave us and said, "Thy will be done." Because it's the toughest thing we can say sometimes. A lot of you right now are having to say that in order to do the right thing. So pray for those who are enduring the persecution. A lot of the people I know in Canada that we are hearing from suffering, wars breaking out as we speak. Just pray for those people. And, iron sharpens iron, they say. Keep building each other up. We need to really be here for each other in these last days because these times are serious, as you can see. And it's time to pursue learning and understanding what we're up against. Because if we don't, we're not going to be as serious about putting on that full armor. And that full armor, as we are told, that what's important with that armor above all is taking that shield of faith. And faith means trust. And I'm speaking from experience. When the Father healed me, the last words I was able to speak before His power just consumed me and His love and His mercy and His grace overwhelmed me, the last words I said was, "I trust you." And after I spoke those words, He lifted me up, healed my broken heart, showed me why I was hurting, and just restored so much clarity. Everything made sense. It was just this peace and love that I can't comprehend or put into words. When they say joy unspeakable, that's what it is. You can't speak about it. You want people to experience. All of those of you out there who are hurting and being lied to by these unclean spirits that you're worthless, that the Father doesn't want time with you, those are lies. So ignore those lies of these unclean spirits. Go outside. Know that the same Father who put that firmament where it is on day 2 and created this world wants time with you. And we have free will. He's given us that. Bad things are happening, and it's all because we chose death, and these unclean spirits are at work. So stay prepared, put on that full armor, know what we're up against, and I hope you guys receive this well. I know it's a lot to take in, but we'll be back soon with some hopefully live hangouts with some guests that I want to share their work and just have you guys answer questions and learn with and study with. But thank you for your patience. I love you guys. You guys are awesome. Stay safe and stay ready.